Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders, 2025 Regional Edward R. Murrow Award winner for Best Podcast. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee.
Chris, I may know the answer to this, but how often do you use AI-related programs, let's just say to generate images?
Yeah, I've certainly made some comedic-inspired images to I'll give you one example. My brother-in-law, a big Lobo fan, and I was asked by his wife, so my sister-in-law, to make an image of him riding a roller coaster with a Lobo shirt on, and it said riding the Lobo coaster, because it was a close game and it was back and forth and stuff. And so
it's really for the family group
yeah,
chat.
mostly, exactly. And it's a good question, especially in our profession, because I think there's a lot of ethical boundaries that we are considering as journalists with the use of AI moving forward, but haven't used in any of my work stuff at all. It has all just been for laughs on images.
It can be fun.
Yeah, but let me ask you though as well, how often do you feel like you're seeing or noticing AI-generated content being used in maybe the elements that weave through your life?
Literally every day.
Yeah.
All the time now. I think we did an episode about AI and ChatGPT in 2023.
Yep.
And it has really exploded in the last few years. We're noticing it in you and I were chatting before this episode, just brainstorming ideas of it is politicians are using it, police agencies. So that's part of the catalyst for why we wanted to sit down and talk about it here. I realize that you and I may follow more news-related accounts than your average social media user. But one thing that we've picked up on is just how frequent major groups and organizations, including, the White House, for example, how often they're making or sharing AI-generated images and videos. And we're seeing that used now by local politicians in campaigns in New Mexico also.
Yeah, and those posts, I think, they fueled a conversation we had to have this episode here. Local police departments using it. Maybe I've seen it for community notices, fun type posts. Local elected leaders, though, posting AI-generated content as well. And I don't think that we're the only ones noticing. You look in the comment sections and a lot of people, there's at least someone who almost goes, is this AI?
Is this real?
Is this real?
Yeah. Some of them may be more innocent in nature. I'm thinking during Balloon Fiesta, where the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office and some other outlets were posting AI-generated images of their logos on hot air balloons, just to do a fun post. But, some people in the comment section were like, oh, cool, you got a balloon, even though they don't. They don't have a balloon.
Right.
So there are some also more deceitful and I think misleading ways AI is being used these days. But we're going to get into it.
Yeah, so let's talk about it. Joining us today are some experts in the field from the University of New Mexico, Professors Melanie Moses and Sonia Gibson Rankin. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
We are happy to be here.
Yeah, well, let's start with you. Professor Moses, what is your background? What has led to your current role at UNM?
Well, I started in what we now call good old-fashioned AI back in the 90s. That's the kind of AI that we don't see proliferating in the world. It's not what's powering ChatGPT.
Okay.
But I started as a computer scientist and actually came to New Mexico to add some biology expertise. And AI is often inspired by biology, right? We really want we think that our AI is mimicking our brain. Mm-hmm. So we look toward nature for how we build computers. And as this machine learning, this kind of AI, large language models, as those started rolling out, I began to reincorporate AI into my research and to really begin to think about the social implications of all of this technology that we're rolling out into the world at this incredible speed.
Yeah.
So over the last few years, that has been my joy and my time-consuming preoccupation, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. And Professor Rankin, similarly, what is your role? How does your work now interface with artificial intelligence?
Sure. So I studied computer science in the mid-90s in Baltimore, Maryland. I went to Morgan State University, went to law school in Illinois, and kept seeing this overlap. Now, keep in mind, right, when I graduated from CS in the late 90s, my friends were like, what are you getting out of this gig for? I mean, I can't describe it to you in the late 90s in computer science. They were giving away cars as freebies if you just go job interview. It was a good time. It was
Wow.
and I'm like, I think I'll go to law school instead. And I started to see that there's this thing about patterns. The thing about computer science and law is legal mindset is the most akin to computing if you actually delve into it. If then else statements is how we decide how the law works. And from there, my scholarship has been able to branch as a tenured professor here at UNM Law. I really get to focus on innovation. And so I'm really intrigued on how we're going to innovate our legal structures, looking at what the technology can do. So whether it's assisted reproductive technology or artificial intelligence or just good old school algorithmic bias, I'm really excited to kind of delve into how that's going to change how our legal structures operate.
Wow. Just from a perspective over especially the last few years, what have both of you noticed? Have you both seen just how ubiquitous I think AI content has become in just what we share online? Have you both noticed that?
Absolutely. So, ChatGPT was released about 3 years ago.
Right.
And that is when it really kind of seeped into the public consciousness, right? Everyone, they had 1 billion users within the first month, right? And so a large section of the planet, right, was suddenly using these AI tools. But these tools had been building over, our entire careers. We had seen this work. I work a lot in robotics. There's a really close intersection between AI and robotics. We were watching these improvements in these kinds of models, and people thought, in 10 years, in 20 years, these models might actually start to make progress in the real world. And what was discovered in, I guess it was 3 years ago, almost to the day, was that if you put enough data and you power it enough with enough computing, the models that we had could suddenly mimic human behavior. And it's a mimic. They're not really human. They're not sentient. Let's get that out there right now, right? These machines are not, they're not actually thinking. They're not your best friend, but they might pretend to be.
Right.
But they really can interact with humans in ways humans and machines have never interacted before. So you're talking about, right, they can generate images that you really love, and they start to talk to you in a way that makes it seem like, oh my goodness, are they seeing into my soul? Well, no, they're just training a lot of data, and they kind of know your type, right?
Yeah.
And so that change has just been extraordinary because of the way that people have started interacting with the technology. So in some sense, it's not new. It's just the growth, this really fast exponential growth of what we'd seen before.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's everywhere is really changing the field, and meaning that, those of us in computer science have this new kind of responsibility to say, hey, what are we actually rolling out into the world?
Yeah. Yeah.
What about you?
No, I think that's such a good point. Particularly, you'll notice in social media, you've got friends, I've got friends, and boy, their writing sure has stepped it up a notch, right? Well, you'll start
Yes.
to wonder, particularly when people are attempting to be professional, they really like, how do I put my best foot forward? And you'll notice emojis when they've never used all those spots on their mobile devices or their phones or their computers before.
Yeah.
That's where I'm seeing it most proliferate. I'm noticing that people's headshots are really, really smooth.
Yes.
So smooth. And it's not facial treatment, it's not surgery, it's using artificial intelligence to improve what they think are things that they may have noticed, but that you and I may have always thought were part of them. You're seeing some of those things flattened out a bit. So that's where I'm particularly seeing it, is social media.
Yeah, emails. We've gotten emails like from new PIOs. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is not you
pitching
writing
something
this
that you're
email.
just like, yeah, this is definitely computer generated.
But for those who haven't followed how AI is developed, let's just give a brief rundown of where we started. Seemingly, in late 2022, you mentioned it had been building over both of your careers, but ChatGPT's public release, I think, is when a lot of people became aware of some of these language model capabilities. For example, it's a generative AI that functions as a chat bot. I know me and my husband admittedly have used it, to generate recipes or workouts, and it can talk to you like, oh, that's really good. It's very flattering also, which is
So
like
flattering.
so flattering.
A
That's
little
really
too
good
flattering.
too flattering. But it can be helpful to use for certain things. And there are plenty of other AI tools that have come online. I'm thinking graphics, voices, music. There's machine learning AI. I think of, Apple's Face ID recognition that's so just second nature to a lot of us now, but that's an AI technology. We won't be able to touch on all types of AI that are out there in this episode, but broadly speaking, from your guys' perspective, where are we with the public release of these updated, more powerful, just image and video generators? Who wants to go first? Yeah.
I will start. So what is amazing is that, as I said, right, there was a sudden acceleration, and there was a question 3 years ago, would this acceleration keep going? Or did it, was it sort of the one-off? It's like, oh, now we have ChatGPT and Google's going to put out their thing and it'll sort of stay there. It has not stood still. So in the last couple of weeks, even and in the last, the end of 2025, we are seeing, OpenAI is releasing a new model, and it's they all perform on these benchmarks, right? These things like, how does it do on the SATs? How realistic are their images? These sorts of tests. Mm-hmm. And they're getting better and better at many of these tests. Google just released a version of Gemini. It outpaced, the most recent tool from OpenAI. And so there's this kind of arms race where they're all investing billions and billions of dollars now, training these models on more and more data. And some of their features are getting better and better. When you use them, they're getting a bit more useful.
We're starting to see normal numbers of fingers.
Right, exactly. Right. It used to be
yes.
Right. So most of the time now, you don't see 6 fingers on the hands anymore in these image generators. But some of it is a little deceptive too, because it doesn't mean that these are thinking and behaving like humans. It doesn't mean that they're perfect. They still have a lot of these biases built in. They still will hallucinate. And hallucination, that's the term that people tend to use when AI just makes things up.
Yeah.
Right? Because these tools, even though they're getting better and better at a lot of things, they're still based on not reality. They're based on, what does it think the next word is that would make sense in the sentence? What does it think you want to hear? That's why it's so flattering. It knows you want to be flattered, right? And so it's less tethered to reality and more tethered to what sounds right. Mm-hmm. And so it's actually harder and harder to detect when it's wrong. It's actually gotten, in some sense, trickier to use these tools kind of responsibly.
Yeah, because I imagine the algorithm wants you to keep using it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I even I always trust Dr. Moses. Like I said, we talk about this stuff every day. I mean, it knows the zeros and ones you liked the last time you interacted with it, and it will give you back another set of ones and zeros. And it knows that you're going to want them in these patterns. It is that binary level. The more we can get our listeners and people around us to really appreciate that it is pattern recognition, and this idea of the hallucinations, I think, is the one that always encourages me to encourage others to pause a little bit, is that it's not an error, it's a feature. It is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, make up what comes next. Mm-hmm. That's how it's designed. And it's really good at it. So I can't get too mad when it makes up things like, oh, you're doing what you're supposed to do. It's on me, the user, you, the user, to be watching for it to do what it does and re-corral it back to where we're trying to get it to.
Yeah. When it comes to how AI is changing just overall life and society right now, I'm married to a musician, so I know, the work that gets put into things like writing and recording a song or hiring an artist to make artwork for a poster. And now we're seeing, AI impacting a lot of the creative work that people do. How do you see AI continuing to shape our lives, maybe from an academic perspective, not just in creative jobs, but overall, like just workforce?
So we had recently a New Mexico AI Summit here in our state, which was really fantastic, put together by our state legislators. And it was legislators, it was academicians, it was community advocates, it was business owners, big and small, and who came together from across our state. And one panel I was on was the AI Art and Heritage panel. And so I was with other creatives. Sorry, I shouldn't have said others creatives. I was with creatives as the non-creative and the lawyer. But they were really talking about what they're seeing as changes for people like your husband and for other people that we know that are born and trained and have a natural talent and ability, and where they're going to see the balance. There's going to be a mix coming forward of individuals who use the AI to enhance what they're already doing. There'll be those who will see that it's not for them, and we're going to watch a really unique area carving out of people that are going to keep their art and their products a little more pure, a little really, really humanistically centered. And I think that we're going to watch there be a branch. What I'm anticipating, what creatives are anticipating, is that people will continue to crave for the human and the human touch, and the authenticity is a word that we talked about a lot. So I'm expecting that to be something coming forward, but we can't get as far as we'd like because we're still in the courts, still trying to figure out the copyright issues. Who has actually taken what data? How are they using it to train the models? Have creatives been properly compensated for their work being taken? So that's at least what we're seeing in some of that area.
Yeah, fascinating.
And I'll add to that in the educational sphere. I mean, there's just been a complete upending, really, of university education, and it's creeping into K through 12 as well, because AI can do many of the things that we ask our students to do for their homework, right? So most people now have heard of, it's not too hard to take your homework assignment and put a prompt into ChatGPT and get an answer. And it's not just, your freshman English essay. It can be whole reports. Those of us in computer science, AI is really good at writing code. And so it's really hard to come up with those assignments that you can get, young students who are starting out to learn how to learn these basic skills because AI is so good at it. Yeah. And so there's this, in the creative space, there's a lot of tension that, is AI, right? Are these companies, scraping up this data? Are they sort of stealing this data and using it for profit? On the other side, in education, you have to ask, is AI sort of stealing the ability of people to learn, right? Because it's so easy to just turn to the AI and it gives you an answer. And, the point in education is not to get the answer. Nobody asks you to write that essay because they want to know the answer. They want you to go through the process of doing the work.
Yeah.
It's
we
critical thinking, right?
struggle
Critical
with
thinking
this right now
yeah.
with our 7-year-old. We were playing a game at home yesterday and she didn't know the answer and she was about to ask Alexa. And I'm like, you can't ask Alexa, but it's just like natural for a kid who, has that ability to go ask.
I was going to say that, we try and do that in our family too. We'll say, who was the name of that actor? Don't look it up. We just have to group remember.
Yes.
If we work hard enough, we can't lose this skill.
Yeah.
Don't lose your memory.
So tempting. I think one of the things that surprised both of us in talking about the formulation of this episode is just the pace of use. We started with the sort of public release of a chat bot in 2022, but now I think about, even to be frank, some of the most computer challenged people are able to find that ChatGPT app, put it on their phone and just sort of ask it a question, tell it to make something, and boom, there it is. And so I guess the point is that technology is just incredibly usable for some folks who honestly would never be able to make any of these things otherwise in years before. I just think about, I had a situation in my own life about making an event flyer. The person was able to do that, but, I would say years before they'd be asking like, who do I hire to make an event flyer or something like that. So point is, it has just made these things really easy for those who haven't been able to normally achieve them to now achieve them. What does that say to you? I think about, folks who I know are, a little older than me, like my parents' age, that are able to make their own photos and whatnot now.
Yeah, I mean, one of the amazing things about this technology and all technologies, right? We just talked about a negative side of this, but there's this positive side is it's so empowering because people can now do things they couldn't do before. And some of those things are really fun, right? Mm-hmm. You can make these crazy, silly videos. Some of those things are really enhanced learning. So there is a side where AI can, diminish our critical thinking, but it can also enhance it. Mm-hmm. Right? The ability to brainstorm with AI is just really, what about this idea and where could I connect this to something else? And those moments where you engage with this tool that way are really, they're exciting and they really do enhance, your existence in the world, our ability to kind of control what's going on around us. Mm-hmm. All those things are enhanced. And so it's a real double-edged sword, right? It's got these, like any tool, right? You can use it for good or you can use it for bad. And I think that is one of the main messages. This came out really strongly in this legislative AI summit that Representative Serrato led, and I lead a group called the New Mexico AI Consortium, and we try to support this kind of understanding of the technology and putting forward having this develop in our state in a way. One of my colleagues uses the word AI sovereignty. We should have some control over this technology. Right now, I think a lot of people look at it as, oh, this technology, it comes out of Silicon Valley and we can use it for good or we can use it for bad. I really want us to think about, well, how can we shape how we actually use it in the future? And how do we, it's going to affect our lives in so many ways. And so one thing we really want to do in education, not just in the university, but just, around the state, is to get people to think, what do I want AI to do? What do I want the world to look like? Because we're in one of those pivotal moments where this technology is going to change what the world looks like. And what we really want is to have, everyday New Mexicans, small businesses, government, the government, the universities all engaged in that process.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about some of the specific examples that we've seen locally in terms of presumed AI generated content. We mentioned in the beginning, we've seen people post what seems like random content, maybe just for the sake of posting on their timeline. One I noticed was an Albuquerque city councilor who posted a photo to social media about fall activities. It was seemingly innocent. The image was clearly not Albuquerque, though. And that's one of the ones I sent to Chris, where this is not Albuquerque.
What is this?
The obvious tell for me was, your AI is showing was there was a woman in the photo reaching for a pumpkin in this beautified pumpkin patch, and she had what looked like a third hand. So it makes you think why are people posting things? It seems harmless, but I'm interested to get your perspective. Are these visuals harmless?
I'm worried. I've got this paper idea in my head. Who do you believe, me or your lion eyes? At some stage, something's going to happen to our minds if we cannot trust what's in front of us. And there was time for whoever posts things that have extra hands or just things that your brain knows isn't quite right, but it looks right enough. And I'm worried about that lack of particularity that's going to start to impact our ability to discern what we see and what we don't see. I'm worried about it in the courts in particular because of the rate that falsified evidence might be presented or instituted, and a jury member who's going to struggle with the images that are put in front of them. We already saw a really complex case in the state of Washington where the defense wanted to raise an AI-enhanced video of a crime scene. And the judge, rightfully, I'm so very grateful, went to a wonderful judicial training, I'm sure, and said, no, I'm not going to allow AI-enhanced video because I know it introduces pixels that never really happened. Now, that judge caught it. What about the next judge who won't? Right. And so that's what I'm worried about is the court of law, because we've got burdens of proof. We've got some standards we need to go for. But I'm also worried about what's going to happen to us when we just start to say, yeah, lots of things have third hands. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's the way legs go. Yeah, that cars can go up and down. I mean, whatever it is, I'm worried what it's going to do to our day-to-day understanding of reality.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and an analogy that there's a philosopher at the Santa Fe Institute, Daniel Dennett, who passed away recently. And before then, he said one of his biggest worries was about counterfeits. And let's think about this. Why is counterfeit money illegal? Right? Why aren't you allowed to just print money? Well, it makes the rest of the money not valuable, right? And no one knows the value, right? It changes the value of the money. And really, though, at its core, what it does is it eliminates our ability to trust that money is worth what it's worth. It's now what AI lets us generate is counterfeit humans and counterfeit reality. Now we can't even, trust that the human we see is there, that the reality that's being presented to us is real. And that erosion of trust is even, I think, more dangerous than the lies that get put out there. It's the inability to trust the truth. Yeah. And I think it's hard to run a democracy, right, when we can't trust the truth.
Right.
So we've made a few little steps in New Mexico. We had a law that passed to outlaw deepfakes in elections. That are surrounding elections. But these areas that you're bringing up, right, there's sort of these gray areas. What if a politician posts an image and it's fake, but it's not really saying anything negative about anyone, right? So there's a lot of gray areas in all of this that are hard to navigate.
Yeah.
That's why we need our lawyers.
Yeah. Along those lines, is there any potential harm in local leaders and politicians using it on their professional timelines without disclosing that it's AI generated?
I think it is very important, actually, to just disclose. It doesn't, right, to say, this was AI generated, just in case, because some people might recognize it and others might not, just so that people don't get accustomed to this idea that nothing out there is real, right? So I think that is an important, that labeling and notice. Notice that AI was used, notice that AI is being used, because it's not just images, but sometimes it's being used to decide who are you going to hire, right? Who's going to go to jail? What should your insurance rates be? If those sorts of automated tools are being used, people should know about it.
Yeah. I was thinking about the campaign season, and you mentioned that law. Admittedly, I had no idea that actually had passed.
We were one of the first in the nation, actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that in effect right now, or does it take effect soon?
It is in effect.
It is in effect.
And I was just discussing whether, in fact, it had been used. It's the Attorney General's office who decides, right, if something has violated this law.
Yeah, because I think to that point, this campaign season, I know a couple campaigns that just, I'm fairly certain, I mean, I didn't, do the research to ask, but it seems my radar went off that I think they're using AI generated imagery here. So without naming names or, putting accusations out there, I've seen what appears to be AI generated images of not only the person themselves, but then also even of opponents. I personally sort of felt shocked to see this without having, gone down the research rabbit hole of like, is this what I think it is? I was just like, pretty sure this is. And that's alarming to me because, especially credibility is so important these days. I think we've seen it over the last decade, right? The term, the expression, fake news is continually brought up and lobbed, whether it's against politicians or news outlets. And that's proven consequential. People do not want to, lose their credibility. So the use of AI in political campaigning, have you seen or had maybe that same feeling that I've had that perhaps you're thinking, I don't know if this is legit? Have you had that experience this election cycle?
I remember seeing some things in the last national election. I would see images and no one had the budget ready at that speed to produce the way things were being presented. There were some people, and once again, no names, but you could notice that the way it was still lots of extra hands in lots of images, so you could see it then. What I've been thinking about, though, is going to be what happens when our brain doesn't say, I think it's AI, but the brain says, sure, everyone does it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just normal.
It's normal. And so that's the part I'm watching for. But what do you think, Molly?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly have been, at the national level, certainly there's just clear, use of AI to generate these fake images of, the candidate themselves or an opponent or the crowds, right? All of those sorts of things can, have been generated. It's pretty well documented. And but it raises this question: when does it cross the line? When does somebody like the DA say, you can't present this false information about an election to our New Mexico citizens? And I think we haven't really answered that question yet. Yeah. Now I'm curious about this. The recent election cycle in New Mexico. Yeah. It's worth some research. So we'll think about that. We are part of a Trustworthy AI Grand Challenge team at UNM. Yeah. And so we're always looking for what are the questions that we should be actually digging into. So you've tossed one our way.
Yeah, absolutely. and you mentioned the law here. I'm wondering if there are any other laws that you know of or on your radar or that you see maybe emerging soon to sort of rein in the AI campaign use, that maybe it could be used, but you got to disclose it. I think about how one of the big election law shifts that we've seen in the last few decades was the I'm so-and-so candidate and I approve of this message, right? That became a centerpiece of pretty much any political campaign ad now. Do you see something like that on the horizon, that it says AI generated image or something like that?
Yeah,
what are the laws?
That is actually what the law says, right? There are specific notifications that have to go on videos or images.
The size of the notification
it has to be visible so that it's not just a tiny little font in the corner. So that is actually on the books. And I think we have a very good law that was kind of groundbreaking here in New Mexico.
Interesting.
We know Florida passed a very similar law to the New Mexico law.
Yeah. And over time, there have been quite a few states, but the question is, does it actually get enforced? And the other piece of it is, do we have the technology? It seems that we do now. A lot of states are looking at laws that say if something you have to have a sort of a watermark, something that indicates who generated an image, whether it's fake or not. There's still, it's still tricky stuff, right? Getting this right is going to take some time.
Yeah.
And so those laws, we are both kind of pushing things forward. I think we're doing some innovative things in the state, and we're also looking at other states. California just passed a suite of laws, and so they have more people and resources to look at some of these, and so following that path might be quite valuable, both to protect us and our civil rights. Privacy is a huge issue,
Very big.
because AI is fueled by data. And there's a real economic push to, grab your data, sell your data. And so I really do hope that that's going to be a piece of the AI push that we have here, is to protect privacy as well as protect people from kind of harms that can come from both deception and, decisions that are made about you that AI may be doing unfairly.
Yeah,
So,
and you think about enforcement, though, even with legislation on the books, I imagine that would be hard, right? Even if looking at this last election cycle and flagging something that was AI generated during a campaign, it's like, well, the damage can already be done. The votes are in, that
Yes,
kind of thing.
yes.
So I think that's another challenge in this realm. But back to, just the growing lack of trust that we've seen in institutions and the media since the COVID-19 pandemic, really. The use of AI, particularly amongst government figures, seems like an area where it can easily fall into that territory of blurring the lines between reality and fiction, especially when trusted sources in the community are using AI to post on social media, what is imitating life but truly fake content. Again, I mentioned, we've seen the White House account and the Trump administration really using it pretty frequently on social media. What is your feeling? Does the use of AI stand to hurt an institution's credibility at this point, or do you see it as just becoming more acceptable and kind of normal now when, the younger generations are growing up with it being so prevalent?
Well, there's a lot to that question.
Yes.
I know.
So I think that the fundamental problem, the fear really, is that it does erode trust, and that institutions that use this are eroding trust, in themselves, but also, and people who use this are eroding trust in themselves, but also just more broadly, right? That we're all sort of going to suffer in this. It's kind of a race to the bottom scenario. It's interesting to see what the younger generations, how they react to this. Some of them, quite a few students who I've talked to, refuse to use this technology.
Yes.
They say, they'll say things like, I was actually quite surprised, even in a group of computer scientists, where in many of my classes, I encourage its use for doing that kind of brainstorming and that really accelerating your critical thinking, and it's 100% possible to do that. But a lot of students would say, this is stealing other people's creative work. I don't want to use it. This is, it's here to deceive me. I understand that these algorithms, these AI algorithms, our first real use of them that was really widespread was in social media, right? The pushing of these different news feeds that really have contributed to polarization. So a lot of young people, rather than adopt, some of them I think are adopting, that's how it is, which is how I think many of them think about privacy, like, I just don't have any anymore.
Yeah.
With AI, a lot of them are saying, no, we don't like this. We want to have a little more control over this technology that is going to be so fundamental. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. And I think there's a real role. Some of the things that we're advocating for is, let's bring people into the conversation. If people don't trust this, let's change the way the technology works. Let's have people have a say in how they can craft this. Because as you said, suddenly they have this ability to interact with technology in ways that they didn't used to interact with it.
Yeah, no, I totally concur. And it's because it will start, once there's a concern about my government, then there's a concern about the job I get, then there's a concern about the loan I get, then there's a concern on whether my doctors have checked all the options available to me. And it's going to blend into all the other spaces, right? There'll be concern rising on when I go to the grocery store. Is this the price because of who I am or because turkeys are on sale this time of year? So those are the things we'll be watching for.
We'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
KRQE News 13 investigations. One of the biggest cons in New Mexico history. How did they get away with it?
Well, they had an accomplice. the state of New Mexico.
A road rage encounter leads to murder.
I miss him every single day.
Did the judicial system fail here?
New Mexico's families, homes, and lives are left in ashes.
There's a level of anxiety.
FEMA has been an abject and abysmal failure.
Watch anytime on krqe.com or our YouTube channel.
It feels like we've only really begun to feel the consequences or the effects of AI generated photos and videos. I know I've already had to tell my friends and family, like, look, no, this is AI, to things that clearly they were already forming an opinion about. Perhaps it was reinforcing a preconceived notion they already had about another thing as well. It doesn't feel like, though, this is really a good place to be in, honestly, when I'm doing that. Even if it is as innocuous as, like, I saw an AI generated video of a New Mexico chili balloon that was supposedly, air quotes, at the Macy's Thanksgiving parade, Ooh. Right? It looked interesting, but I was like, no, this is AI, because it had the Sora watermark on it. And I know that Sora is one of those video generating models, but, you know, there's a lot of people that have no idea what that watermark is. They just ignore it, right? So it doesn't feel like a good place to be in. But what do you see is the future of these models, what they produce, and the effect on society? The very big question there.
That is the big question.
So one thing I've been wondering about is when it's going to say Sora generated. Now, with your mobile devices, you take a picture, you can enhance the coloring, change the lighting. At what level do I need to say, hey, I clicked all the I'm feeling lucky buttons that pop up when I take a picture of something, right? And when I now run it not just through my local mobile device and their features to enhance my pictures, which are also using AI to do that, do I have to admit that I've used the make my picture better from my own phone?
These filters, yeah.
Yeah, the filters, as opposed to running it through Sora to do the same thing. And I don't think anyone's prepared to do that when they have that beautiful picture of them and their loved ones. So that's the part that I'm unsure about.
Yeah, it's really hard to draw the line because the technology is so pervasive now. So yeah, that is going to be, the courts are going to figure that out. And as a society, though, I think we need to all be kind of thinking through that. But I will say, I just had my first time that, as far as I know, where I had a YouTube video and I thought it was real. And it was mostly audio. It was like a series of pictures and audio of a famous computer scientist talking about, the sort of AI doomsday. And it was very, very, the voice was incredible. I listened to a lot of videos and, audio from this person, and it really sounded like him. And it was about 10 minutes in. I was doing something else, not paying it. And I was like, I don't think he would have said that. And then I realized he didn't say that, right? And those
That's
moments,
terrifying.
It took 10 minutes to get there.
It took me 10 minutes to get there, and I spent a lot of time thinking about these things.
Yeah.
So I think most people will have those moments, and that will help be a bit of a check. But I'm not sure. I think we just absolutely don't know what this will look like going forward. And it is why, we need to have some standards and some regulation about how do we actually keep this from proceeding so quickly that just normal humans just kind of can't keep up and adjust and say what's okay. We need some time to figure out where to draw that line.
I like that word standards as opposed to maybe even regulation, because standards keep up with the technology, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great conversation that we had about, how do we keep this technology kind of under control? And really, I think the key is under the control of us, like just normal people. Right. Yeah. How does the average New Mexican kind of make sure that this technology is doing what they want? Kind of through the legislative process. And one thing that really comes forward is we need to refer to standards, right? We need groups of experts at the national and even international level to say, this is okay and this is not. Someone's going to have to start drawing these lines. And then we can point to those and say, if it's just pictures to your friends, maybe it's not really important that you put any kind of label on it, right? But if you are showing, your political campaign adversary right before the election, yeah, you need this kind of label. Okay. And so, if there's an AI filter on your camera, is that different from Sora? Yeah, probably. And so we're going to have to, take a little time, slow down a little bit, I think is a really good way to think about this.
And this tech does not slow down.
Tech does not want to slow down on its own.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the billions of dollars people are pouring into it. They want it to advance. So you mentioned, I've also done that for a family member, pointed out a video, like, this isn't that person. I think knowing the red flags, though, is really helpful in teaching those people how to notice those red flags. So like in that example, you mentioned a lot of it was audio. That's how I was able to also figure out, though this was an AI generated using the person's voice, because they're not showing them speak really in a lot of these videos. But let's talk about that for a minute. Misinformation and deep fakes. It's important to be able to tell what is real and what is fake. Just for our audience listening, can you guys give us some quick tips for how to spot a fake image or video?
Well, they have not quite figured out glass to mouth. There's still something about the distortion. They haven't gotten the physics. The AI doesn't understand physics deep enough. But that's one tool is not necessarily a paper cup like this, for instance, but if it's glass, there's a little sign that they haven't figured out how that refraction of light works. That's my one tip.
Shadows is another good thing to look for if there's trees or.
Yeah, so I think right now there are those little tips. As we said, it's gotten harder and harder. It's quite subtle now. I actually think it'll be impossible for just a normal person to tell, and very soon. I mean, these models are on those metrics of make an image look physically more realistic. They're incorporating new kinds of techniques. There's these ideas of world models. Like right now, as I said, that they're kind of untethered to reality. People don't really like that, so they're figuring out ways, the technology companies, to tether it to reality. So the fake things will look more real. Yeah. And I do think we might reach the time where it's really impossible to tell unless we have, this sort of standards infrastructure that says, you're required, if this is generated with AI, that you say it. And maybe that just has to extend to everything. Just a little watermark, right? The Sora thing. And then we teach everyone the Sora watermark is how you know it was generated with Sora. The Gemini watermark is how you know it was generated with the new one. It's called Nano Banana. That's
yes, I saw it.
And so that is, and then what are the consequences if you don't do that?
Right.
And that's where we have to, have the law and the regulations and people's customs and norms about when is that really required.
We've got two places we're really, really concerned, though, about misinformation and deepfakes. One of them will be in our domestic relations courts because they deal with so much information, text messages, videos, images. You were doing this with the child. You were doing this with the child. And it is super easy to infiltrate and create false evidence in our courts. So right now, domestic relations judges, not only here in our second judicial district, but also across the state and across the nation, judges I've talked to are really, really concerned because of the speed of which they have to make decisions. The other place will be synthetic intimate images. This is a grave concern, and I know our Attorney General is really on the handle about this, as they are in California and some other states. But this will be not just revenge porn that you've heard about, where you'll take an image that had been given to one individual to only use for private use and spread it around, but now they're declothing exes or just people in their classes, people in their community, and putting those images out there. So that's a different type of legal protection that we're going to be looking for. And so that is something that's also happening across the country.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
It is terrifying.
I took a class earlier this summer for journalists and, just about tools and things and doing stories, because we're given video and pictures a lot in the news. And so we have to validate the authenticity of those images before we put it out there for our own standards. And one of the tips I picked up too was, using AI tools to validate an image. You can put an image in and say, can you show me where this was originally posted? And sometimes it can be helpful, and sometimes, you have to do your own research. But that is one tip I picked up.
Yeah. I was going to say it's funny because they just found out, good news, breaking news to all of us. I believe the Constitution was generated they ran it through one of those AI filters. The U.S. Constitution's all AI, Bill of Rights. I mean, it's just hilarious, right? So it's really, really tricky to get this figured out.
Yeah.
And I know some of the work that both of you do and UNM is related to furthering what you call the trustworthy AI, as I understand. So UNM is part of this AI Institute led by Brown University. What is that work? What's the goal there? Tell us about that.
This is super exciting. So now you've asked us research questions, and we're not going to be able to stop us. Yes, we're part of the National Science Foundation funds AI research institutes, and Brown University is leading this one on trustworthy AI for interactive agents. So think about the chatbots that we've now all heard about that are counseling people, sometimes in very terrible, damaging resolving tragic situations, assisting people with suicide, for example. We've heard some of these cases, particularly with young people. AI companions that people get very attached to, even though there's no there, right? There's no actual companion on the other side of it, but they influence them. And so this is really, kind of tragic stuff that has negative consequences for people. We're looking at how can we really think about brand new technologies, new approaches, so that we actually can extend better mental health care in our rural communities using AI, not using chatbots, but what is the next technology? And we don't know yet, but this is a process that we are engaged with. We just had our kickoff meeting with Brown. We're really interested in something called participatory design. So it's not us professors just sitting in our offices coming up with the research questions, but we're going to reach out to community groups and patient groups and doctor groups and rural health care and Indian Health Service, those sorts of groups, and say, what actually do you need? What would be the helpful things, right, that AI maybe could do? And maybe those tools don't exist yet. And if they don't, we want to help to build them. And we want to make sure that we build in trust, because the tools are actually trustworthy. Because the real core of the problem, I think, right now is people don't trust the tools because the tools aren't trustworthy. They shouldn't trust the tools. And so that's the kind of research that we're doing. And it's very exciting. We're working with some folks who have got real, great computational, mathematical, high-tech chops, but also people who work on the ground with, vulnerable people who have been kind of swept into these negative situations with chatbots.
And when you use the chatbot, is your desire to be more effective or more efficient, right? And I wrestle with that. I find that when I use them, I'm more effective. I save no time. The sun goes down because I'm really being intentional about my goal. But I know other people that say I've been able to cut lots of time with this. And in certain professions, we know that this is something that's really heavy on our medical community, is the amount of time they spend with charting and with kind of capturing their day. Can we help them with these heavy, burdensome parts of their work so they can have more time with patients and doing these unique things that we need them to do, the person-to-person contact, but the paperwork has become really onerous. But how can we make that part more trustworthy so that they can really have rich time with their patients? So this is going to be really important for us in New Mexico in particular.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If I could add to that, one of the uses that we all use now, I think, is summarizing meetings, right? You no longer need a person to summarize your meeting notes. The AI can summarize your meeting notes. And about 90% of the time around now, it's totally accurate, reasonably accurate. 10% of the time, it just will make things up or leave out really important points. And so if this is your doctor's office, or if this is a police report, right, there's already been examples that have been revealed that because its goal is to predict what it thinks happened, it sort of homogenizes everything, and it says what should have happened is what happened. And then when people even go back to check, they don't even know that it didn't happen, right? If the doctor forgot to tell you, this caveat about your medicine, and then they review the notes, they think they told you, right? And so there's suddenly this interplay, this misinformation. It's misinforming the patient and the doctor, and there's sort of no reality check there. And so that's the kind of thing we really want.
And we run
to
into
develop.
Confirmation bias all the time using the technology. I mean, it starts with the capitalization, it ends with a period. That must be what happened. But we're human, and we look for our own shortcuts in our own mind. So our work with Brown, our work with UNM has been really exciting and important work.
Yeah.
Really
Well,
neat.
to round this conversation out, I think some people, especially elder millennials,
Those of us who just turned 40, indeed.
one of the last generations who've grown up, in the pre-internet, pre-smartphone era, may have had a tendency to say, oh, we're done, we're cooked. AI has taken a wrecking ball to the idea of figuring out what is real life and what is fake. But is that how people should feel? What are the positive takeaways from some of the concerns we've raised that you guys can speak to?
Well, I'll say so we have talked about a particular kind of AI, and there are all kinds of other types of AI that are really making enormous advancements in science and technology, for example. So that's what I get really excited about. I'm not sure how to solve the chatbot deception problem, right? But we are seeing just revolutionary changes in science and technology. We're going to cure a lot of diseases. We're going to have next generation batteries so we can have our solar powered data centers, which is the thing we really need. We're going to have a lot of these technological advances. So it's going to be a mixed bag. And I think the question is, how do we, emphasize the good, right? Invest more. I think in New Mexico, we have the ability to invest in this piece while also putting on some mitigation and some standards, as we said. And, I actually have come recently to understand, putting these standards in place doesn't impinge on innovation. Like, we wouldn't have an automobile industry if we didn't have rules of the road. Right? If anybody could drive on any side of the road, right? How many cars would you sell, right? If cars were so deadly. People used to fight seatbelts. Now car manufacturers sell you all of these safety features. And so that's kind of what we want to do, is have an ecosystem of standards and regulations that say, this is the direction we want to nudge the technology so we can really, realize these benefits. So I think it's possible.
Something that's given me a lot of hope is young people, young adults, young teenagers that I'm coming across who are intentionally disconnecting. Right? They are literally just going outside and playing. They're literally getting brick phones so that they aren't tempted, and they have more timers on their devices. They have all bought up all those record players that we got rid of in our years. Right. They're bringing them back. They want the real, they want the touch, they want the human moment. And that gives me a lot of promise. When students push back at me about saying, I don't want to learn how to use AI, I'm like, I'm not mad at that, because it takes a lot to really get this thing in your head. And I'm glad you want the slightly harder route because of the delayed exponential benefit. And so that's what's been giving me a lot of promise. A lot of young parents I talk to are really trying to find more ways for their kids to go back to tactile learning, to just embracing the spaces, and they're doing a really hard thing though, of trying to keep their kids away from what is appearing everywhere. So good luck to you and the 7-year-old.
It's hard. It's hard. This Christmas, actually, my sister-in-law and I bought what is now like a really great idea someone had, which is just creating those phones, like the analog phones, where all it does is dial and you can call your cousins on it. And so we got one for all the cousins this Christmas.
That's
and
delightful.
It's like my little one is like so excited to just call her cousin on a regular phone. It's like a novel concept, right?
You've got the old one where you got to run your finger from zero all the way. That's rotary, really going back.
Well, so do you encourage students? We had the last UNM professor we had on this show talking about ChatGPT was former UNM professor Leo Lowe. In May of 2023, he was saying everyone needs to learn how to use ChatGPT, because you got to know the tools in order to, understand its faults, its uses, its potential. Do you encourage people to learn AI?
I think it is absolutely essential, right? It's like you've got to understand how the world works around you, right. And you have to come to it with, kind of a critical lens, but also a playful lens. I really encourage people to experiment, because that's how. And one of the great things about the technology is it's so inviting to experiment. Anybody can experiment with it, and what you need to do by experimenting is figure out what its limits are, what it can and can't do. And, we'll change our behavior in the world because of that. And so one thing that I think, there's a lot of scary things in the AI space. There's a lot of promise. And I think one important message is, like, the future is not foretold, right? Mm-hmm. We actually, by learning about this technology and voicing our opinions, about how it should be used, sometimes it's voting with our wallet, sometimes it's talking, literally voting, what kinds of rules do we want to govern this? And we've got to be informed in order to do that. And so that, I think, is actually an important message.
You must know how to use it. This is becoming a really big issue in the legal community, particularly with the number of lawyers that are not just pro se persons, but lawyers that have been entering hallucinated cases into the record. The way the technology works is once that fake case is in the record and in the documents, and it makes its way into our printed, published cases, it's going to be complete chaos if we have broken information in the data that the AI is going to be feeding on. So they've really got to know how to use it. Here's the tips I give individuals. It's the same as go to court when you don't need to be there. It's a lot of fun. Use the AI when you don't need to use it. And particularly use it in places where you have a little bit more domain expertise, because then you'll be able to see the edges of where it is great and where it's not good yet. Mm-hmm. And I think that helps a little bit. I don't use it for medical advice because I don't know medicine, right? Mm-hmm. We already know an individual, he wanted to decrease table salt in his life, and he went to the AI and I said, I've got a great idea. Why don't you start adding in sodium bromide? The man was in the hospital 3 weeks, almost dead, right? Stick to where you think you've got a sense of what you understand before you start to play. But if you do, you'll start to find out, then now that I know how the technology works and where I can understand what its limitations are, then I can see how to implement it in places where I'm not as strong. So that's a good tip to use.
Yeah.
Well, fascinating conversation, and y'all are in a fascinating, growing, ever-changing field.
We're going to be employed forever. Oh, my
right,
goodness.
That's right. I mean, the Pandora's box has opened, and I don't see a world where AI is going back into that box. So Professors Melanie Moses and Sonia Gibson Rankin, thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Again, a special thanks to UNM professors Melanie Moses and Sonia Gibson Rankin for joining us for one of our longer conversations that we've ever had on the
We
podcast.
probably could have
but
went for longer. It's just so
Yeah.
many things you could talk about.
There's a lot to talk about when it comes to AI. We didn't even share like our favorite AI generated videos that we've ever seen.
Favorite.
I certainly have one in mind.
Oh,
but
okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to mention it?
Nah, we're good. We're good.
Okay.
So,
All right.
yeah.
Well, maybe we'll put links in the show notes.
Yeah, just
Easter eggs
email
there.
me if you want to know. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, I just asked them, what have you guys used ChatGPT for on the way out? I've used it to generate trip itineraries, workouts, things like that. When you're cooking, what is the most efficient way to do this? I don't know. There's all kinds of ways you can use it.
Yeah, I particularly like using it to just ask questions of things that I'm wondering. And, obviously fact checking the answer you get back. But it has made that a lot easier than the old approach of type it in a search engine, find a result on a web page. So it's interesting like that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we obviously have come up with a lot of ideas just, in our own daily lives. But if you guys have ideas or people you'd like to hear from on this show, always feel free to reach out. I'm Gabrielle.Burkhart@krqe.com via email and GBurkNM on social media.
And I'm at Chris McKee TV, also chris.mckee@krqe.com. Thanks for watching and listening.